Aloe Conson asks, how do we go about converting or weakening the uber influential leftists who run the entertainment industry? I don't think you can, Aloe. I don't think you can. It's kind of like saying how do you use your outboard motor to turn the Titanic away from the iceberg? There's just not enough force, not enough leverage, just not enough vector on it. So I think the reason I answer that way is to say you can't think about changing Hollywood. You can't think about moving Hollywood. You have to think about flanking Hollywood. You have to think about parallel structures. You have to think about a parallel Hollywood, because that giant thing over there is not going to change. They're in too deep. One of the really ironic things, is Avengers. I haven't seen the new Avengers movie, but everything that Joss Whedon writes, I like very much. I love the first Avengers movie, and I love Firefly and Serenity. So everything he writes, I love. Everything he says, I can't stand. I just can't stand. That's an interesting thing. Jeremy Boring points this out. He says when he's writing, he's a libertarian conservative, because that's actually what he believes. I don't think you can write this stuff and not believe it, because writing comes from the heart of hearts. But when he speaks like a gigantic progressive, and it's because the culture expects that, and he wants to be seen to be a good guy. He's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He's earned every penny of it. But for a political philosophy that demonizes wealth, the president just a day or two ago said, if you have $300,000, that's more than anybody could ever need, or their families. I had a little thought coming up in the elevator earlier today. I really thought, if I had a chance to ask Barack Obama a question from a crowd, let's say, I'd say, Mr. President, I just want to tell you what a special opportunity it is for me to speak to you, because you are, in fact, the first of a kind. You really have been a trendsetter here, sir. You really the first of a kind. There's never been another president like you. We've never, ever, ever had a communist in the White House before, but you're the first. So let me just ask you this. So this guy who flies in his own 747 is telling people that they can't, if you make $300,000 more money than you could ever use or need. What does he know? He's never made a dime in his life, ever. He just, anyway. So you can't really change this. These people are so deep into this philosophy. Joss Whedon, he has to say the things he does because he wants to fit in, and he believes it. I'm not saying he doesn't believe it. But when you leave him alone and you give him a chance to make something interesting, he comes up with the characters in Firefly, and he comes up with Captain America saying God doesn't dress that way, or there's only one God, or whatever. He says things that are heroic and big because it's a heroic and big philosophy. And this is a larger point that I think I'm going to save till later, because I think there's a question pretty much on it. But he's a perfect example of this. George Clooney is. All these guys make their living by portraying guys with guns, and and they're all anti-gun, and it's this giant sort of cognitive dissonance where a guy like Alec Baldwin, who is a complete raving lunatic and not a nice guy, got a lot of fame and a lot of truly justified kudos for playing a super conservative guy, and he did it beautifully. He's interesting. That guy's interesting, and he's an interesting character. Jack something or other on back on 30 Rock. So, it's you can't change Hollywood. You can just flank it. Now, as it turns out, Clint Eastwood is one of the few people who, if there was a secret society of conservatives in Hollywood, he'd be one of the people that was in it. But there isn't, so he's not. Clint is a force of nature. Clint doesn't have to worry about what people think. Clint doesn't have to worry about being tarred as a conservative. Clint Eastwood is one of the greatest directors who ever lived. He's a legend, an actual legend, and everybody wants to work with him, including Sean Penn and Matt Damon and all the rest. So if Clint Eastwood wants to make a movie that's very conservative, he'll get Bradley Cooper. So with the exception of one or two people like that who are big up there, Bruckheimer's one of them. He's a fairly conservative guy. But with that exception of one or two of these kind of forces of nature, you're not going to get Hollywood to change. So you just have to go out and make movies that do better. I was talking with a guy, Bear, Dr. Bear, not too long ago. He does a movie guide and really does great work. And he basically ranks movies and looks at their box office and stuff. And he said, I think he said it was some incredible number, some really incredible number. It's like of the top 20 movies or 30 or 50 or something, not one of the top grossing movies was an anti-American movie. He said the ones that do well are the ones with the pro-American, pro-Christian, pro-conservative themes. They're the ones that do big business. And you get things like Redacted and Lions for Lambs. They don't even make the catering budget. They don't make a day's catering budget back. And they just keep making them because of their ideology. So, as I've said before, Aloe, the thing you need to understand about this business is they don't care if they make any money. That may not sound like it makes sense to you, but you have to understand how Hollywood works these days. It's like this. Jeremy makes another interesting point. That's a smart kid. Don't tell him I said so. But Jeremy said that we got into trouble culturally when the antitrust legislation back, I guess, in the 30s or 40s, used to be that a studio like Paramount owned the studio, and they also owned large strings of Paramount theaters, and people were going to the movies 3, 4, 5 times a week back in the 30s and 40s. And Jeremy's point was when the studios owned the theaters, then the revenue that the studios took in was based upon making the American people happy. If you were making movies that the American people didn't want to see, then they wouldn't go to your movie theaters. And if they didn't go to your movie theaters, you had no revenue to make more movies. So even though there were a huge number of leftists in the 30s and 40s and 50s and so on, huge numbers, they had to make pro-American movies in order to keep working. When the Supreme Court ruled that this was an antitrust violation, and the movie theaters were divorced from the studios had to look someplace for the revenues, since they couldn't just take it directly from the theaters. They had, obviously, revenues would come to them through theaters, but through a distribution company. And when the studio system was more or less destroyed, what happened was they went through all the private donors and all the guys who were rich, and they got burned badly enough. Then all of a sudden, foreign donors started stepping up. Nowadays, films are financed completely by China or UAR or UAE, rather, or Dubai. And, not only can you not make a movie that's critical of China, but if you make one that's critical of China, China will put enough pressure on it for you to have to go back and redo the special effects in the movie and make it North Korea. And so what happens is Hollywood is not, the money comes from somewhere else. And given the accounting practices in Hollywood, which in any other business in the world would land everybody in prison for the rest of their lives, this foreign money comes in, and everybody gets paid up front. The reason a film costs 50, 60, 70, 80 million, $200 million is not just because of the special effects. It's because Tom Cruise is getting $20, $30 million up front. And the reason he's getting up front is because there is no back end. I was on a set. I watched Ed Norton when the director of the studio who did the executive in charge of the studio that did Fight Club accidentally revealed, just in an offhand manner, that Fight Club DVDs were going through the roof, and Ed Norton turned to him and said, "Oh, really?" Well, when I say go through the roof, I mean that they're doing well relative to the market, but the market is very badly suppressed. Peter Gruber says, looks like somebody owes somebody a check. Ed Norton could not get royalties from Fight Club because of the accounting, and my understanding was, if it's changed recently, that the Tolkien estate was told that they didn't have any money. They weren't going to get paid because the Lord of the Rings movies, which made $4 billion with a B, weren't profitable. So the accounting is crap. So everybody takes their money up front. That's why the movies cost so much. There is no back end. Everybody gets the movie up front. And since everybody's already been paid, this is the point, since everybody's already been paid and not likely to see any more money, they don't care if nobody goes to see it in America. They'll go see it overseas, and even if they don't care. They've got their paychecks. They're going home. They've made enough money to live on for 5 years. And that's how it works. So once you understand that, it's not about the money. People talk about, we're going to boycott Hollywood. They don't care. As long as China and Dubai and Saudi Arabia and all the rest of these foreign financiers don't boycott Hollywood, then they don't care. And as Jeremy pointed out very succinctly, he really hit the nail right on the head with this one. A Hollywood director would rather go to a Hollywood party with a film that bombed at the box office but still stuck it to the man and stuck it to George Bush and stuck it to those knuckle-dragging conservatives out there in flyover country. He'd rather be that guy than a guy who comes into the party with $400 million profit on a film that, celebrated conservative values or even American values, pro-American movie. He'd be laughed out of the room. That's how it works. So, it's really just that simple. Sorry, I just had this flash. I got a bad plug-in and it just crashed, and I just have to restart it so I can see that I'm getting a picture, because if we don't have a picture, then we're in trouble. So that's the story, and that's how it works. So as I said, Aloe, it's not that you can change Hollywood. I think it's a waste of time and effort to change Hollywood. I think the answer is to make movies independent of Hollywood. And the good news in all this is the cost of production has gone down so much. I've got, for $10,000 here, I've got the ability to cut feature films. And for another $10,000, I could get an Ursa, Blackmagic Ursa, which is shoot 4.5K camera, and shoot feature films. Really, $10,000, $12,000 will do it. You don't have to pay for lab fees anymore. You don't have to do any of it. You're just shooting 4K feature film quality stuff, and it's a data recorder. It's not a camera. Eisenfire was telling me what the thing is. It's like 14 f-stops, 16, 20, something like that. It's insane how much information. You can just go out and turn it on, take it back to the studio, and have the colorist fix it. So anyway, there you go. That's the problem, and any effort to try and change it is like trying to row the Titanic out of trouble. It's like getting in a lifeboat and rowing as hard as you can to change the course. The answer is to get into the lifeboats and row away from the Titanic, because the Titanic is going down. There's nothing you can do to bail the Titanic once it hits that iceberg, and it's already hit it. So there you go.